Happy Movement Monday, Mob. You guys voted, and this week we're doing a hip mobility drill. And this is also one of my all-time favorite hip mobility drills if I have any discomfort or a lot of tension in the front side of my hips. Before I dive in, we also had a three-way tie for second place. So I'll put another poll up this week so we can see what routine we're gonna do together next week. Also, today's hip mobility drill is a good example of my functional mobility formula, which I wrote an article about last week, so check that out if you haven't already. So the first part of the functional mobility formula is recognize. So if you have tension or even pain in the front of your hips, that's a good recognize that you have an issue going on here. But the number two in the first move we're gonna do is reduce tension. So we're just gonna do a nice hip flexor stretch. So from this full kneeling position, we're gonna step out in front. So that means we're gonna be stretching our left side here. And then what you want to do is think about tucking your tail between your legs or getting a posterior pelvic tilt. And then we're just simply going to drive hips forward. So we're going to do a solid 10 of these on each side. You're just going to go forward until you feel that muscle tension in the front side of the hip. You could even get a little bit in the thigh or the quads here, totally normal. Now, if you're going through this and you're already loose and you're not feeling much tension, to take it to the next level, you just reach overhead and throw the hands behind you. So now we're stretching that whole fascial sling. So it's really gonna be pinpoint on the front side of that hip. So let me do a solid 2 more here, seeing if I can go further with each rep. And I already feel a nice stretch right through there. Again, number 1 is reducing tension. We'll do the other side from the front on view. Again, posterior pelvic tilt, drive forward. I actually feel looser on this side, so I'm automatically gonna go to throwing those arms overhead, doing a solid 10 here. Again, if you've been following me, I'm all about maximum efficiency, so within a 5-minute period, depending on what your problem area is, you're gonna feel pretty darn loose and ready to go. This is actually one of my go-to routines before any heavy lower body day, or especially if I'm gonna be doing lunges, since this loosens you up in more of that lunge pattern. Let's do 1 more here. I already feel the blood flowing in the front of the hips. So that was the second part of the equation, but the first move, which is reduce that tension. Now we're going to restore the range of motion, specifically hip extension range of motion. Just because as a society, we're more forward flexion dominant creatures, whether we're sitting at a desk, driving in the car, or just lounging in the evening time. So to do a hip extension stretch, same exact position as the hip flexor stretch, except you kind of widen your stance a little bit. And instead of a posterior pelvic tilt, you actually let that pelvis dump forward. So now I'm gonna push my pelvis or hips forward. I should go way further than that hip flexor stretch, and it should be a little bit more pinpoint right over the front of the hip joint. And then we're just gonna do a solid 10 on each side. If you can really get into this, you can kind of pulse it at the end range, just kind of warming up to it. If you've never done this before, you might feel some extreme tension. So again, turtle wins the race, especially with any new movements that you're not familiar with. I'm gonna do a solid 2 more here. Nice. Just trying to go further and further with each repetition. So straight on view, half kneeling, widen out a little bit, dump that pelvis forward, drive those hips forward, really getting a nice stretch here. Again, this one should be a little bit more pinpoint to the hip joint, because this is more of a hip joint stretch than a muscle stretch like the first one. And this is how we start to restore that hip extension range. Like I mentioned on the other side, you can kind of pulse through if it feels good, feels loose. Let me do a solid 2 more. And again, you can even pulse up to 4 or 5 times, especially if it feels like you're getting to that end range. So there's 2 moves in a matter of like 2 to 3 minutes. The third and final boss is gonna be reinforcing the ranges we just opened up with specific exercises. Since this routine is focused on the front side of the hips, since we just reduced the tension of the hip flexors and then we restored that hip extension range, now we're gonna train the hip flexors so we can reinforce the 2 moves we just did prior. So for this one, you're gonna sit up nice and tall, feet out in front of you, and then you're just simply gonna drive 1 foot towards the ceiling. So I'm not trying to compensate and move through the back here, I'm just trying to isolate this side. So We did 10 of everything, so we'll do 10 here. Again, to make it harder, you would just go slower, trying to keep this leg straight. I can already tell I'm breaking a sweat. It seems simple, but with the intentional moves all in an order like I'm showing you, you're gonna feel like you're working out. But again, it's only 5 minutes and it's great to do before an actual workout. So sitting up nice and tall, driving that foot towards the ceiling. Again, turtle wins the race. Nice, slow, controlled movement here. Nice, I'm gonna do 4 more to take it up to the next level. For the last 2, I'm gonna hold. You see I'm shaking, bring it back down. Last one. So simple movements, but depending on the intention of what you're doing during the movement, you can make this more challenging and you don't need any equipment at all. And that's what we call maximum efficiency. So there's this week's routine, and I followed my functional mobility formula. So if you haven't checked out last week's article to see how this could help you, not just with the front of your hips, but the article specifically talks about that hamstring tension and how to loosen it up, then check that out. And if you're liking these weekly routines, did you know I have daily routines as well? If you really want to build up consistency with your mobility and your core training, then check the link in the description and see how I can help you take your health to the next level. Until next week.